The time of the Passover was quickly approaching. So Jesus and his disciples made their way to Jerusalem. As they approached the city, Jesus sent 2 disciples ahead to retrieve a donkey and a colt. "Go to the village ahead of you, and just as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'The Lord needs it, and will send it back here shortly.'" They did as Jesus instructed. They laid their cloaks on the donkey for Jesus to sit on. As Jesus rode into the city, a large crowd gathered around. Some spread their cloaks on the ground, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The whole city was stirred with excitement. "Who is this man?" "Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth," the crowds answered. The next day, Jesus and his disciples entered the temple courts. Immediately, Jesus began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. He exclaimed, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him because the whole crowd was amazed at his teachings. Later that week, Jesus was having dinner with his friends, and a woman came in with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume. She broke the jar and anointed Jesus with the perfume. Some of those present rebuked her. "Why waste this perfume? We could have sold it and given money to the poor." But Jesus replied, "Leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want. But you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Later, Judas went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" They counted out 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. Finally, the time had come to prepare the Passover meal. Jesus' disciples asked, "Where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" Jesus responded, "Go into the city to a certain man and tell him, 'The teacher says, my appointed time is near. I'm going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house.'" The disciples did as Jesus asked and prepared the Passover. When evening came, Jesus and the disciples gathered around the table. While they were eating, Jesus got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. When he had finished washing their feet, Jesus said, "Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet." While they were eating, Jesus took bread, And when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." After dinner, they went to the Mount of Olives, and on the way Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter replied, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." Jesus answered, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Then they entered the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He then took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. He said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more. Being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." Judas arrived with a large crowd of people. Judas had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus replied, "Do what you came for, friend." The men stepped forward and seized Jesus. Peter drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Jesus called out, "No more of this!" And he reached out and healed the man. Then all the disciples fled. So the soldiers, their commanding officer, and the temple guards arrested Jesus and tied him up. First they took him to the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest at that time. Peter followed at a distance and sat with the guards in the courtyard. A servant girl came up to Peter and said, "You also were with Jesus of Galilee." But he denied it before them all. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Then Peter went out to the gateway where another servant saw him and said, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." He denied it again. "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them." And Peter exclaimed, "I don't know the man." Immediately, a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered Jesus' words. "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." He went outside and wept bitterly. While this was happening, Jesus was being questioned. Many false witnesses came forward, and Jesus remained silent. Then the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus said, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothing to show his horror and said, "Why do we need other witnesses? You have all heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?" "Guilty," they all cried. "He deserves to die." Then some of them began to spit at him, and they blindfolded him and beat him with their fists. When Judas, who had betrayed him, realized that Jesus had been condemned to die, he was filled with remorse. So he took the 30 pieces of silver back to the leading priests and the elders. "I have sinned," he declared, "for I have betrayed an innocent man." "What do we care?" they retorted. "That's your problem." Then Judas threw the silver coins down in the temple and went out and hanged himself. Very early in the morning, the leading priests and the elders of the people bound Jesus, led him away, and took him to Pilate, the Roman governor. Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas, or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews!" they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with Jesus to be executed. Once they came to Golgotha, they crucified Jesus and the 2 criminals, one on his left and one on his right. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. They offered him bitter wine mixed with gall, but Jesus refused to drink it. They divided up his clothes by casting lots and placed a sign above his head, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, the disciple took her into his home. From noon until 3 p.m, darkness came over all the land. About 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus knew that everything was now finished, and to fulfill the scriptures, he said, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar was there. So they put some on a sponge and put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." Then Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last. At this exact moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." We will now leave in silence as the bell tolls 33 times, once for each year of Jesus' life. You may take the nails as a remembrance of Jesus' ultimate sacrifice.